To really understand one of the darkest moments in human history, you have to go deeper than just the events. You have to look at the ideas that fueled it all. So, where did these ideas come from, and how on earth did they get so powerful? In this explainer, we're going to break down the core pieces of Nazi ideology, looking directly at the source material. All right, before we dive in, let's get one thing crystal clear, because our source makes it unavoidable. This ideology was not based on facts. It wasn't based on evidence. From the very beginning, from its absolute foundation, it was rooted in hatred. To understand anything that comes next, we have to start right there. So, how was this whole thing constructed? Well, according to the material, it was really built on two main pillars, two foundational beliefs that held everything else up. Let's take a look at the first one. The first pillar was something called extreme nationalism. And look, this wasn't just about being proud of your country. This was something far more aggressive. It was this all-consuming belief that your nation was just inherently better than all the others, and that its interests had to dominate everything and everyone. And that brings us to the second pillar, the idea of a racial hierarchy. So this ideology didn't just rank nations. It claimed that you could divide up all of humanity into separate races and then rank them, put them on a scale from supposedly superior all the way down to inferior. So what happens when you combine those two ideas, this belief in a superior nation and a belief in a superior race? Well, you get the central driving myth of the entire ideology, the quest for a so-called master race. And the source material is very direct about this. The Nazis actively and constantly promoted this myth of a master race. This one idea became the absolute focal point of their whole belief system. It was the ultimate goal they claimed to be fighting for. This wasn't just some vague concept they talked about. This myth had a very clear, ultimate goal, and it was actually written down for the whole world to see, turning what was a belief system into a stated, official objective. And here it is, in Hitler's own words. The state must preserve racial purity. That one sentence, it basically became the mission statement for the entire ideology. And it became the justification for everything that was about to happen. So, of course, that begs the huge question. What does racial purity even mean in this context? If that's the goal, how does an ideology try to achieve it? Well, the answer is disturbingly simple. In order to define what was pure, the ideology first had to define what was impure. It had to create a target. To achieve their goal, they manufactured an enemy, using one of the oldest and ugliest tactics there is: scapegoating. And this just lays out so clearly how it worked. Germany was facing real, incredibly complex problems, right? Economic depression, political chaos. But the ideology gave people a simple and totally false answer. It took all of those real-world problems and blamed them entirely on one specific group of people, the Jewish people. Which brings us to what might be the most important question of all. If these ideas were just based on hatred, not fact, how did they get so much traction? How does a lie manage to convince a nation? Well, the answer lies in the engine they built to spread these beliefs. They used a very specific two-part system to turn these hateful myths into something that millions of people would eventually accept as the truth. And here's that process. It's really two steps. First, they tried to justify their hatred with pseudoscience. These were ideas that were dressed up to look like real science or biology, but were totally fabricated. And second, they amplified those lies over and over and over again through relentless propaganda. And it is so important to understand the difference here. Real science starts with evidence and follows it to a conclusion, wherever it leads. The pseudoscience they used did the exact opposite. It started with a hateful conclusion first, and then it just invented facts to try and justify it. So, we've seen the ideology, the myth, and the engine that pushed it out into the world. But why does any of this matter today? What's the lasting lesson in all of this for us? The first major takeaway here is a really chilling one, and it's that ideas don't actually have to be true to become powerful. You can build an ideology that literally changes the world on a foundation of pure hatred, as long as you disguise it with the language of science. And that leads directly to the final critical point. The hateful ideas by themselves, they weren't enough. It was the propaganda that made them powerful. Propaganda was the amplifier. It was the tool that took this ideology from the fringes of society and turned it into a force that could completely reshape a nation. And so, all of this leaves us with a question that feels more relevant right now than ever. Knowing that this is the playbook, that this is how hateful ideas are made powerful, how can we, in our own lives, learn to spot the difference between information that's based on fact and propaganda that is designed to manipulate us?